I need a loving mother for my sons, and you need shelter the rich Duke proposed to the poor teacher. Everyone in Bristol thought the Duke of Ashbourne was heartless, but they didn't see him trembling as he looked at his motherless sons. Clara Vance was scrubbing soot off a desk when the schoolhouse doors flew open with such force they banged against the stone walls. Rain blew in on a gust of November wind, bringing with it the smell of wet wool and expensive cologne, and something else, desperation. The Duke of Ashbourne stood in the doorway. Clara knew him by reputation, of course. Everyone in Bristol knew the Duke wealthy beyond measure, recently widowed, raising 2 young sons in splendid isolation. She'd never seen him in person, had never expected to. Dukes didn't visit village schoolhouses where poor women taught farmers' children their letters. But here he was, disheveled in a way that suggested he'd dressed hastily. His cravat was crooked, his dark hair windswept, and his boots were muddy details that would scandalize the society pages if anyone else had witnessed them. He wasn't alone. 2 small boys stood behind him, perhaps 7 and 5, with the same dark hair and gray eyes as their father. Both had tear-streaked faces, and that particular stillness of children who'd cried themselves silent. Miss Vance. The Duke's voice was cultured, aristocratic, and utterly exhausted. I need to speak with you, privately. Clara set down her cleaning rag, very aware of her ink-stained fingers and the plain wool dress she wore. Your Grace. I'm afraid the schoolhouse doesn't offer much privacy, but the children have gone home for the day. The Duke stepped inside, his spurs clicking against the wooden floor. The sound was incongruous in this humble space, a reminder of the vast gulf between their stations. I'll be direct, he said, pulling a folded document from inside his coat. I'm here to offer you a position, not as a teacher, as my wife. Hello, lovely. If you're enjoying this tale of hidden beauty and unexpected love, I'd be so grateful for a like or subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories where pain shatters and true character shines through. And if you'd like, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every note, and your presence makes these stories come alive. Clara stared at him, certain she'd misheard. I beg your pardon? A marriage of convenience. The Duke gestured to his sons, who stood by the door looking lost and small. My sons need a mother. You, from what I understand, need shelter and security. I'm proposing a business arrangement that benefits both parties. The words should have been insulting, reducing marriage to a transaction, treating her like a governess to be hired. But Clara heard something beneath the formal language. Exhaustion. Grief. A man at the end of his rope, doing what he thought he must. Your Grace, I don't understand. Surely there are women of your own station who want my title and my fortune. The Duke's jaw tightened. Who look at my sons and see obstacles to their own children's inheritance, who smile at me while calculating how quickly they can ship the boys off to boarding school and forget they exist. He moved closer, and Clara could see the shadows under his eyes, the lines of strain around his mouth. This was a man who hadn't slept properly in months. I've interviewed 20 governesses, he continued. Every single one was either terrified of the children or trying to seduce me for my title. Then my steward mentioned you, the village school teacher who stayed late every evening to tutor students who couldn't afford proper education, who reportedly uses her own meager salary to buy books for children whose parents can't provide them. Your steward is very thorough, Clara said faintly. I pay him to be. The Duke held out the document. This is a contract, marriage in name, with separate bedchambers and full autonomy over the nursery and household management. In exchange, you'll have shelter, security, and a generous allowance. My sons will have a mother who sees them as children rather than inconveniences. Clara's mind reeled. This was insane. She'd been in Bristol for 3 years, hiding from her past, living in a cramped room above the bakery and spending every penny on her students. The idea of security, of not worrying about rent or food or whether her past would catch up with her, it was tempting beyond reason. But marriage to a duke? Even a marriage of convenience? I need to think about this, she said. You have until tomorrow morning. The Duke's voice was firm but not unkind. "My carriage will be at the schoolhouse at 8. If you choose to accept, bring whatever belongings you have. If not, I'll never trouble you again." He started to leave, then turned back. "For what it's worth, Miss Vance, I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you a role that desperately needs filling. My sons are drowning, and I don't know how to save them, but I've watched you with the village children. You do." The Duke left with his silent, tear-stained sons, and Clara stood alone in the empty schoolhouse, holding a marriage contract and trying to remember how to breathe. That night, she lay awake in her cramped room, listening to rain hammer against the roof. The bakery below had long since closed, leaving her in darkness broken only by a single candle. The contract was spread on her small table. She'd read it 3 times, looking for the trap, the hidden clause that would make this dangerous. But it was straightforward. Marriage, separate quarters, generous allowance, full authority over household and children. The Duke even included a clause allowing her to maintain her own bank account unheard of in 1770, when married women's property automatically became their husbands'. Clara thought about her past, about the scandal in London that had forced her to flee, to change her name from Miss Clara Ashford to Clara Vance, to hide in a village where no one knew her face or her family's disgrace. If she married the Duke, that past might resurface. Her secrets could ruin his reputation, damage his sons' futures. But if she didn't marry him, she'd continue living in this room, teaching for pennies, always one disaster away from destitution. And those boys, those silent, grief-stricken little boys who needed someone to see them. Clara made her decision. The Duke's carriage arrived at precisely 8 o'clock. Clara stood outside the schoolhouse with her single trunk, everything she owned fit in one modest container, and watched the black and gold vehicle roll to a stop. The door opened, and the Duke himself stepped out rather than sending a footman. "Miss Vance." He looked almost surprised to see her there. "Your Grace." Clara lifted her chin. "I accept your proposal." Something flickered across the Duke's face. Relief, perhaps. Or maybe just exhaustion finally easing slightly. He helped her into the carriage himself, his gloved hand steady under her elbow. The interior was luxurious beyond anything Clara had experienced. Velvet seats, brass fittings, the lingering scent of leather and the Duke's cologne. She settled across from him, hyper-aware of the space between them, of how his long legs made the carriage feel smaller than it was. "We'll marry this afternoon," the Duke said as the carriage began moving. "Special license. My solicitor has everything arranged. After the ceremony, we'll proceed directly to Ashbourne Manor." "This afternoon?" Clara's voice came out higher than intended. "That's rather sudden. I see no point in delay." The Duke pulled out papers, the marriage contract, and additional documents. "Once we're wed, you'll have immediate authority over the household and the children. My sister-in-law, Lady Margaret, has been managing things since my wife's death, but she—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "She has different ideas about child-rearing than I prefer." "What ideas?" "How? That children should be seen and not heard. That boys need firm discipline and military precision. That affection is weakness." The Duke's jaw tightened. "My sons have been silent for 6 months, Miss Vance. They used to laugh, to play, to be children. Now they're like little ghosts haunting their own home." Clara heard the pain in his voice, saw it in the tension of his shoulders. "And you believe I can help them? I believe you see children as people rather than problems to be managed." The Duke held out a pen. "If you're still willing, sign here." Clara took the pen, their fingers brushing in the transfer. Even through gloves, the contact was electric. The Duke pulled back quickly, as though he'd felt it too. She signed her name Clara Vance, because Clara Ashford was dead and buried with her past, and became betrothed to a duke in the time it took to write 12 letters. "There's something you should know," Clara said, her conscience demanding honesty. "I'm not who you think I am." The Duke's gray eyes fixed on her. "Explain." "Clara Vance isn't my real name. I fled London 3 years ago after a scandal involving my family. I've been hiding here, hoping my past wouldn't find me. She met his gaze steadily. If we marry, that past might resurface. It could damage your reputation, your son's futures. You deserve to know that before we proceed. The Duke was quiet for a long moment, the carriage swaying gently as it rolled through Bristol's streets. What was the scandal? He asked finally. My father was a gentleman of modest means who gambled away everything. When creditors came, he tried to marry me to a man 3 times my age to settle his debts. I refused and fled instead. Clara kept her voice steady. By now, I'm probably presumed dead. If I resurface as your Duchess, people will ask questions. Let them ask. The Duke's voice was firm. Miss Vance, or Miss Ashford, if that's your true name, I'm not interested in your past. I'm interested in your present ability to help my sons. If scandal comes, we'll face it together. You're very trusting for a man who just met me. I'm very desperate for a man who's watched his children suffer for 6 months. The Duke leaned forward slightly. Besides, I'm not the paragon of virtue society pretends I am. My marriage was arranged, loveless, and ending in my wife's death from complications of childbirth. I have my own ghosts, Miss Vance. Your past doesn't frighten me. Clara felt something loosen in her chest. Then I suppose we're well matched. 2 people with secrets, making a practical arrangement. Exactly. The Duke sat back. Though I should warn you, Ashbourne Manor is not what you might expect. It's grand, yes, but it's also crumbling. My late wife preferred spending money on London society rather than estate maintenance. You'll have your work cut out for you, making it livable. I'm a village school teacher, Your Grace. I'm accustomed to making do with limited resources. Please, call me Alexander. We're to be married in 3 hours. Formality seems excessive. Alexander. Clara tested the name, liked how it felt. And you may call me Clara. Clara. The way he said it, with that aristocratic accent softening around the syllables, made it sound like a different name entirely. Tell me about your teaching. What made you choose that profession? They talked for the rest of the journey about education, children, the books they'd read, and the ideas they valued. Clara discovered that Alexander wasn't the cold, heartless Duke society painted him as. He was intelligent, thoughtful, genuinely passionate about his son's well-being, and when he smiled, rare as it was, his entire face transformed. The ceremony was brief, clinical, conducted by a rector who clearly did this often for titled Gentlemen Needing Quick Marriages. Clara signed her name again, Clara Ashford, this time, her real name, because marriage records couldn't be falsified, and became the Duchess of Ashbourne in less time than it took to teach a lesson. Alexander placed a ring on her finger, simple gold because there'd been no time for anything else. His hands were steady, but Clara noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself with careful control. You may kiss the bride, the rector said. Alexander hesitated, then leaned in and pressed a chaste kiss to Clara's cheek. His lips were warm, his breath smelling faintly of mint, and Clara felt the contact all the way to her toes. Thank you, he murmured, too quiet for anyone else to hear. For taking a chance on this arrangement. On us. Thank you for offering shelter, Clara murmured back. For seeing me as more than just a poor teacher. They left the church as husband and wife, and Clara tried not to think about how surreal this all was. This morning she'd been a village schoolteacher. Now she was a duchess, sitting beside a duke in his carriage, heading toward a manor and 2 motherless boys who needed her. Tell me about your sons, she said as they left Bristol behind. Their names, their personalities, what they love and what frightens them. Alexander's expression softened. Edmund is 7. He's the elder, feels responsible for his younger brother. He used to love books, particularly adventure stories. And Thomas is 5. He's more physical, always climbing things and getting into mischief. Or he was, before. Before their mother died. Yes. Alexander's voice roughened. They found her, you see, in her chambers. She'd hemorrhaged suddenly, and they were there when it happened. Edmund tried to get help, but by the time I arrived, it was too late. They've barely spoken since. Clara's heart ached. And your sister-in-law's response was military discipline? Margaret believes in propriety above all else. That emotions are weakness, and boys must be trained like soldiers. Alexander's jaw tightened. I should have sent her away months ago, but I didn't know what else to do. I'm a duke, Clara. I was raised to manage estates and navigate politics, not to comfort grieving children. You're also their father, Clara said gently. That's the most important thing. I hope you're right. Alexander looked out the window as Ashbourne Manor came into view, a massive stone structure, beautiful but clearly neglected. Because I've been failing at it spectacularly. The carriage rolled up to the entrance, and Clara saw a severe-looking woman waiting on the steps. Gray hair, rigid posture, and an expression that could freeze water. Lady Margaret, Alexander said, his voice turning cold. Let me handle her. Sen. Lady Margaret did not take the news of Alexander's marriage well. You married a schoolteacher? Her voice could have etched glass. Without consulting the family? Without a proper engagement period? Alexander, this is beyond inappropriate. It's scandalous. It's done. Alexander's hand found Clara's elbow, steadying. Clara is my wife and the new Duchess of Ashbourne. She has full authority over the household and the children. You're relieved of your duties, Margaret. You're making a terrible mistake. Margaret's cold eyes swept over Clara's simple dress, her ink-stained fingers, her obvious lower status. This woman is beneath you in every way. She'll ruin the children and destroy your reputation. What she'll do, Alexander said with quiet steel, is show my sons the affection and attention they desperately need. Now, I'll thank you to pack your things and depart by morning. Margaret left in a fury of silk and outrage, and Clara found herself alone with Alexander in the massive entrance hall. I apologize for that, he said. Margaret has very fixed ideas about propriety. And yet you married me anyway. Clara looked around at the crumbling grandeur, water-stained walls, dusty furniture, curtains that had been beautiful once but were now faded and torn. You weren't exaggerating about the manor's condition. My late wife preferred spending money in London. Alexander's voice was carefully neutral. I've neglected it since her death, too focused on just surviving each day. Then it's fortunate I enjoy a challenge. Clara squared her shoulders. May I meet the boys? Then? Alexander led her to the nursery, a large room on the second floor that should have been bright and cheerful. Instead, it felt like a museum, toys arranged in perfect rows, books pristine on shelves, everything ordered and lifeless. Edmund and Thomas sat at a small table, perfectly still, their faces blank. Clara's heart broke. Boys, Alexander said gently. This is Clara. She's going to be staying with us, helping care for you. Neither boy reacted. They just stared at her with those gray eyes that looked far too old for their faces. Hello, Edmund. Hello, Thomas. Clara knelt so she was at their level. I'm very pleased to meet you. Silence. I understand you like books, Edmund. Clara continued, undaunted. What kind of stories do you enjoy? More silence. But Edmund's eyes flickered briefly to a shelf where adventure novels were displayed like museum pieces. And Thomas, I hear you're quite the climber, is that true? Thomas's lips twitched, almost a smile, before the blankness returned. I think, Clara said, standing, that this nursery needs some changes, starting with permission to actually touch the toys and books. Lady Margaret said. Edmund's voice was a whisper, the first words either boy had spoken. Lady Margaret is gone, Clara said firmly. And I say toys are meant to be played with, books are meant to be read, and children are meant to make messes and have adventures and be loud when they need to be. For the first time in 6 months, Thomas smiled. Over the following weeks, Clara transformed Ashbourne Manor. She opened curtains, letting light flood rooms that had been dark for too long. She gave the servants permission to laugh and talk instead of moving like silent ghosts. She brought music back to the house, playing the old pianoforte in the drawing room even though it was out of tune. And she worked with the boys. At first, they were hesitant, too trained by Margaret's discipline to believe this freedom was real. But slowly, carefully, Clara drew them out. She read adventure stories to Edmund, using different voices for each character until he laughed despite himself. She took Thomas outside to climb trees, uncaring that it wasn't proper for a duchess to have mud on her skirts. She let them be children again. Alexander watched from a distance at first, as though afraid to hope. But Clara would catch him in doorways, his expression soft as he listened to his son's returning laughter. One afternoon, she found him in his study, staring at papers he wasn't really reading. "They're playing in the garden," she said from the doorway. Actually playing, with sticks as swords and a blanket fort as their castle. Alexander's eyes closed, emotion stark on his face. "Thank you," he whispered. "I didn't think I'd ever hear them laugh again. They just needed permission to be children." Clara moved into the room. "And time. Grief doesn't follow schedules. Neither does gratitude." Alexander stood, crossing to her. "Clara, I know our arrangement is meant to be practical, but I want you to know you've given me back my sons. That's worth more than any marriage contract could stipulate." They stood close enough that Clara could feel his warmth, could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. The air between them felt charged, heavy with possibility. Then a letter arrived, delivered by a London courier, addressed to the late Clara Ashford. Clara's blood ran cold when Alexander handed it to her. "The late?" he asked quietly. "I told you, I'm presumed dead." Clara stared at the letter like it might bite. "This shouldn't have found me. No one should know where I am." She opened it with shaking hands, and her worst fears materialized on paper. "Miss Ashford, or should I say, Your Grace. Yes, I know where you are, know what you've done, and I think it's time we discussed the price of my continued silence about your resurrection. I'll be calling on Ashbourne Manor next week. Your devoted cousin, Lord Pemberton." "Who is Lord Pemberton?" Alexander asked, reading over her shoulder. "The man my father tried to force me to marry." Clara's voice shook. "The man I fled London to escape. He's found me, Alexander, and he's going to use my past to destroy everything." Sue. Clara was packing when Alexander found her at midnight. She'd spent the evening after dinner making plans to leave, to disappear before Pemberton could arrive and ruin Alexander's life along with hers. Her trunk was half filled, her hands shaking as she folded the few dresses she'd acquired since becoming Duchess. "What are you doing?" Alexander stood in her doorway, still dressed, as though he hadn't even attempted sleep. "Leaving." Clara didn't look at him. Couldn't bear to see disappointment in those gray eyes. "Before Pemberton arrives. Before my past destroys your future and your son's reputations." "Absolutely not." Alexander crossed the room in 3 strides, catching her hands to still their frantic movement. "Clara, you're not going anywhere. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Alexander's grip was gentle but unyielding. "A man from your past is attempting blackmail. You think running will protect my family. You're wrong. Alexander, Lord Pemberton is vicious. If he reveals that I'm not dead, that I fled an arranged marriage, that I've been living under an assumed name, the scandal will touch you, your sons, everything you've built. Then let it." Alexander pulled her away from the trunk, backing her toward the wall until she was caught between mahogany and muscle. "I don't care about scandal, Clara. I care about you. About what you've done for my sons, for this house, for me." He was so close now she could count his eyelashes, could see her reflection in his eyes. The candlelight flickered across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones, the fullness of his lips. "This was supposed to be a practical arrangement," Clara whispered. "A marriage of convenience." "It was." Alexander's voice dropped lower, intimate and rough. "But somewhere between the wedding and watching you teach my sons to laugh again, it became something else. Something real. Alexander. I didn't hire a teacher, Clara." His hands came up to frame her face with devastating gentleness. "I found a soul. Someone who sees my children as precious rather than burdensome. Someone who makes this crumbling manor feel like home. Someone who—" He paused, vulnerability stark on his features. "Someone I'm falling in love with." Clara's heart stopped. "You can't mean that. I've never meant anything more." Alexander's thumb traced her cheekbone. "I know this wasn't part of our agreement. I know you signed on for separate chambers and autonomy and a business arrangement. But Clara, these past weeks have been the first time I've felt alive in years. Not because you're convenient or useful, but because you're you. I'm a fraud." Clara felt tears burning. "I'm not who I pretended to be. I'm not brave or special. I'm just a woman who ran away from her problems. You're a woman who refused to be sold like property, who chose hardship over subjugation, who spent 3 years helping children in poverty when you could have returned to London and begged your family's forgiveness." Alexander leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. "You're the bravest person I've ever met, Clara. And if Pemberton thinks he can use your past to hurt you, he's going to discover what happens when someone threatens a duke's wife. I don't want to ruin you. You couldn't." Alexander's voice was fierce, certain. "But running away would break me. And it would devastate the boys who've just started learning to trust again. Please, Clara, don't leave. Let me fight for you the way you've been fighting for us." Clara looked up at him, this duke who'd started as a stranger offering shelter and had become something infinitely more precious. "I'm not going to let Pemberton destroy what we've built," Alexander continued. "When he arrives next week, I'll face him. Not as a duke defending his reputation, but as a husband protecting his wife. And if he tries to hurt you, he'll learn that my title comes with considerable power and very little patience for bullies." "You'd do that for me?" Clara whispered. "Risk scandal, fight my battles, stand beside me even though our marriage was supposed to be merely convenient?" "I'd do anything for you." Alexander's lips brushed her forehead, her temple, the corner of her mouth. "Because somewhere between signing that contract and watching you play in the mud with my sons, convenience became commitment. Transaction became love. And I will not let you go without a fight." Clara surged up to kiss him properly, pouring 3 weeks of suppressed longing into the contact. Alexander made a sound low in his throat, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her close until no space remained between them. They kissed until breathing became difficult, until Clara's carefully pinned hair fell loose around her shoulders, until the candles burned low and the midnight hour passed into something approaching dawn. "Stay," Alexander murmured against her lips. "Not in separate chambers, not as a convenient arrangement. Stay with me as my wife, my partner, the woman I love." "Yes," Clara breathed. "Yes, I'll stay. I'll fight. I'll choose this over running, over hiding, over letting my past define my future. Then we face Pemberton together." Alexander kissed her again, deep and claiming. "And afterward, we build the life we both deserve. One where shelter becomes home, and convenience becomes love." Clara held him close, feeling his heart race against hers, and knew she'd finally found what she'd been seeking all along. Not just shelter, not just safety, but a place where she belonged. Woo. Lord Pemberton arrived the following week in a carriage that screamed, "New money attempting to look like old." Clara stood at Alexander's side in the drawing room, her hand steady in his despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. The boys were safely in the nursery with their new governess, a kind woman Clara had hired who actually liked children. "Your Grace." Pemberton swept in with false bonhomie, his eyes sharp and calculating. "And dear cousin Clara, risen from the dead. How? Remarkable." "Lord Pemberton!" Alexander's voice was arctic. "State your business." "Business?" Pemberton's smile was a shark's. "I'm simply here to reconnect with family, though I must say, Clara, your father would be devastated to learn you chose marriage to a duke over the match he'd arranged for you. My father tried to sell me to pay his gambling debts," Clara said, her voice steady. "I chose freedom over bondage. I'd make the same choice today." "Freedom!" Pemberton laughed. "Is that what you call tricking a duke into marriage? Hiding your identity?" I wonder what society would say if they knew the Duchess of Ashbourne is actually a presumed dead runaway. They'd say she's a woman of remarkable courage. Alexander's hand tightened on Clara's, who refused to be treated as property and instead built a life of value and purpose. They'd say she's a fraud. Pemberton's mask slipped, showing the viciousness beneath. And I'm prepared to say exactly that, publicly, unless certain arrangements are made. Let me guess, Alexander said coldly. Financial arrangements? You're very perceptive, Your Grace. £50,000 should purchase my silence adequately. Clara felt sick. £50,000. It was extortion, plain and simple. No. Alexander's voice rang clear and firm. Pemberton blinked. I beg your pardon? I said no. Alexander stood, drawing Clara up with him. You're not getting £50,000 or £50. You're getting nothing except a warning. You can't be serious. I'm deadly serious. Alexander's aristocratic authority filled the room. You see, Lord Pemberton, I've spent the past week having my solicitors investigate you quite thoroughly. Would you like to know what they found? Pemberton's face paled. Gambling debts that exceed Clara's father's by a considerable margin. Alexander continued. Several breach of promise suits from young ladies you courted, then abandoned. And most interestingly, a marriage 3 years ago to an heiress who died under suspicious circumstances, leaving you her entire fortune. Those are vicious rumors. They're documented facts. Alexander's smile was sharp as a blade. My solicitors are very thorough, so here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave Ashbourne Manor immediately. You're going to forget Clara's location and existence. And if you ever attempt to contact her, threaten her, or spread rumors about her, I will unleash every resource at my disposal to investigate your late wife's untimely death. You're bluffing. Try me. Alexander's voice dropped to something dangerous. I'm the Duke of Ashbourne. I have connections throughout Parliament, the courts, and society, and I will use every single one to destroy you if you threaten my wife again. Pemberton stood frozen, calculation warring with fear on his face. Leave now, Alexander said softly, and we'll forget this meeting occurred. Stay, and I'll ensure you're remembered for all the wrong reasons. Pemberton left in a fury of expensive tailoring and impotent rage. When the doors closed behind him, Clara collapsed into Alexander's arms, shaking with relief and residual fear. Is it over? She whispered. It's over. Alexander held her close. He won't be back. Bullies like Pemberton only attack when they think they're safe from retaliation. The moment they face real consequences, they fold. You investigated him? Prepared all that evidence? The moment you showed me his letter. Alexander pulled back enough to meet her eyes. I told you, Clara. I fight for what's mine. And you're mine, not as property, but as my partner, my love, my wife, in truth. Clara kissed him, pouring gratitude and love and wonder into the contact. That evening, they hosted a small dinner for the local gentry, Alexander's way of publicly declaring his support for Clara and their marriage. The guests were initially curious, some clearly skeptical of this mysterious new duchess, but Alexander put an end to any speculation with a simple declaration. My wife, he said, standing to offer a toast, his hand finding Clara's, is the most remarkable woman I've ever known. She came to Ashbourne Manor as a teacher and became so much more. She's returned laughter to my home, joy to my children, and purpose to my life. Any who question her place here questions me. The room fell silent, the weight of ducal authority making his meaning clear. To the Duchess, someone called finally, raising a glass. To the Duchess, the room echoed. Clara felt tears burn her eyes as Alexander squeezed her hand, as the community accepted her not because of her birth or status, but because their duke had claimed her as worthy. Later, after guests had departed and the boys were asleep, Clara and Alexander stood in the nursery doorway, watching Edmund and Thomas sleep peacefully. They asked if they could call you Mother, Alexander said quietly. This afternoon, while you were dressing for dinner, Edmund wanted my permission first. Clara's breath caught. What did you tell them? That they should ask you themselves. Alexander pulled her close. Because you deserve that choice, Clara. You've earned their love, but it should be freely given, not assumed. The next morning, over breakfast, Edmund looked up from his porridge with serious gray eyes. Clara? Thomas and I were wondering. He paused, gathering courage. Would it be all right if we called you Mother? Not to replace our first mother, but you feel like a mother now. The kind who plays and laughs and makes everything feel safe. Clara knelt beside his chair, pulling both boys into her arms. I would be honored, she whispered, tears streaming freely now. So very honored. Alexander watched his family embrace, and Clara saw him wipe his eyes surreptitiously. That night, as they lay together in their shared chambers no longer separate, no longer pretending this was merely convenient, Alexander traced patterns on Clara's bare shoulder. Tell me something, he murmured. That first day, when I offered you the contract, what made you say yes? Desperation, Clara admitted. Fear of my past catching up. The promise of shelter and security. And now? Alexander's voice held vulnerability. Why are you still here? Clara turned to face him, her hand finding his heart. Because shelter is just a roof, Alexander. But love is the only true home. And I've found that home with you, with our sons, with this beautiful, broken manor we're rebuilding together. Alexander kissed her, softly, reverently. I love you, Clara Ashford Blackwood, Duchess of Ashbourne. Wife, mother, the woman who changed everything. I love you too, Clara murmured. My reluctant Duke, who became the most devoted husband, who fought for me, protected me, chose me over reputation and convenience. They held each other as moonlight streamed through the windows, two people who'd started with a contract and built something infinitely more valuable. A marriage of true partnership. A family bound by choice rather than obligation. A home built on love rather than convenience. And in the nursery down the hall, two boys slept peacefully, knowing they were safe, loved, and home. The end. If you believe true love can find you in the most unexpected places in a contract signed out of desperation, in a manor falling to pieces, in the eyes of two motherless boys who just needed someone to see them, then you understand that the greatest stories aren't about perfection. They're about broken people choosing to heal together. Clara walked into that schoolhouse as a teacher. She left as a duchess, a mother, a wife. Not because a duke offered her shelter, but because she was brave enough to accept it, because she saw past transaction to possibility, because she chose to stay when running would have been easier. What would you have done? Accepted the Duke's contract or returned to your safe, small life? Tell us in the comments. And if you believe that love can bloom in the most pragmatic of arrangements, that titles matter less than kindness, that family is made not just by birth but by choice, then subscribe for more stories of the heart. Because sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the simplest of proposals. I need a mother for my sons, and you need shelter. And somehow, impossibly, that transaction becomes the truest love of all.